Honestly, from the very first moments of this story, I felt deeply moved by the quiet depth of a 29-year love. To me, this isn't just an unexpected inheritance. It feels like a final, carefully planned act of love from a wife who kept protecting her husband even after she was gone. What I find truly remarkable is how she built an entire hidden life, yet still chose to live simply and lovingly by his side. That kind of devotion is something I genuinely admire. And if you think you fully understand the person you've spent decades with, Kevin James' story might completely change that.
29 years of marriage, and the thing that breaks you isn't the funeral. It's the Tuesday morning after, when you make 2 cups of coffee without thinking, and then stand in your own kitchen holding a mug that has nobody to give it to. My name is Kevin James. I teach high school history at South High School in Denver, Colorado. Have for 2 years, same classroom, same window that faces the parking lot. Same collection of students who arrive in September convinced history is the most irrelevant subject available, and leave in May having changed their minds, or at least having pretended to convincingly enough to pass. It is a modest life, and I have always been satisfied with it in the way that people are satisfied with things that are genuinely theirs. Sandra was not a modest life. Sandra was the most interesting person I ever met, and I met her at a faculty mixer in 1995 when she was a guest of a colleague and was arguing with a philosophy professor about the ethics of inheritance, with the specific cheerful intensity of a woman who was going to win and knew it before she started. I introduced myself at the point in the argument where the philosophy professor was visibly losing, because I have always had good timing, and she looked at me and said, "Are you going to argue with me too?" And I said, "Not until I know what position you want me to take." And she laughed. And that was the beginning. We were different people. I mean that in the way that becomes more true over time, not less. The kind of different that is complementary rather than conflicting. The kind where each person fills in the outline of what the other doesn't quite reach. Sandra was entrepreneurial in a way I am not. She had businesses, consulting work, she called it, in the early years, and then later projects, which is the word people use for work they don't want to explain at dinner. She traveled frequently. She kept her professional life in a separate compartment from our domestic one, with the efficiency of a person who has decided that integration is overrated. I respected that. I respected her. I didn't ask questions she didn't offer answers to. That was, as I would come to understand in the week following her death, both the right choice and the most expensive one I ever made. Monday, September 16th, 4:47 p.m. The call came to my classroom phone, the one on the wall that almost nobody uses anymore, which is why when it rang during my 5th period prep, I startled badly enough to knock a stack of essays off my desk. The Denver Police Department. An officer named Greer. A collision on I-25 southbound at the University Boulevard exit. A silver Lexus SUV. Sandra's plates. The officer's voice was professional and kind in the specific way that people are professional and kind when they are delivering irreversible information and know it. I sat down on the edge of my desk. "Mr. James? Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here. I'm sorry to tell you that the driver, we believe your wife, was pronounced at the scene. The paramedics responded within 4 minutes, but the impact was, because yes was the only word I had." I called Frank Odom from the parking lot. Frank has been my closest friend since we coached Little League together in 2003, and has the quality of a man who can be reached at any hour and will always answer. He answered on the first ring. "Kev, what's wrong?" "Sandra," I said. "There was an accident." A pause. "How bad?" Frank was at South High in 18 minutes. I know because I counted the minutes in the parking lot. Because counting things is what I do when I need something to do with my mind that isn't the thing my mind is trying to do. The week that followed was the specific blur that grief produces in the immediate aftermath. Not a fog exactly, more like a series of very clear individual moments that have had all the connective tissue removed. So you remember the flowers on the kitchen table and the sound of Drew crying in the hallway and the specific weight of the pen when you signed the funeral home paperwork. But the hours between those moments have been taken somewhere and you don't have access to them. Amber flew in from Seattle. Drew drove up from Colorado Springs. They were there by Tuesday evening, both of them. And the 3 of us moved through the Washington Park House in the particular orbit of people who were sharing the same grief, but experiencing it privately, touching, checking in, going separate directions, coming back together. The funeral was Saturday, September 21st. Sandra had a lot of friends, more than I knew, in some cases, which is a sentence that I would come to understand differently in the weeks that followed. The service was full, the eulogies were warm. I spoke last and said the things that were true, that she was brilliant, that she was funny in the specific way that catches you off guard, that she had argued with a philosophy professor the night I met her and won, and that 30 years later I still wasn't sure I'd ever matched her. People laughed. Sandra would have wanted that. Monday, September 23rd, 9:14 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table on South Race Street with a cup of coffee. 1 cup. I was making 1 cup now, deliberately with the specific intentionality of a man retraining his habits, when the doorbell rang. The man on the porch was 61 or so, in a gray suit with a briefcase. The kind of presentation that suggests official business without being specific about what kind. He introduced himself as Victor Paulson, a notary and estate administrator. Mr. James, I apologize for calling without more notice. I've been trying to reach you, but given the circumstances, I understand. If you haven't been attending to messages. I haven't, I said. Come in. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. He opened his briefcase with the practiced efficiency of a man who does this regularly. He produced a folder. Inside the folder, a deed, a key, and a document with a notary seal. Your wife designated me as the administrator of a specific asset transfer, Victor said. She executed this document 14 months ago, with instructions that it be delivered to you personally within 10 days of her death. The transfer was automatic. No probate required. The asset is titled directly to you. I looked at the key. It was a modern key card, matte black, with a small silver number embossed on the edge. PH2. What asset? I asked. Victor placed the deed in front of me. Spire Tower, 1600 Glenarm Place, Denver. Unit PH2. It's a penthouse, Victor said. 2 floors, approximately 3,200 square feet. Your wife purchased it 8 years ago under an LLC. 14 months ago, she transferred the LLC's sole ownership to you personally, with instructions for this delivery. I looked at the deed, at the key card, at my name, printed in the clean type of an official document, as the owner of something I had never once heard mentioned. She never told me about this, I said. Victor's expression was careful. I'm not in a position to speak to what Mrs. James chose to share or not share. I can tell you that she was clear and deliberate in the documentation. She wanted you to have this. Why didn't she tell me about it while she was alive? He paused, the kind of pause that has an answer in it that the person is choosing not to give. Mr. James, I simply administer the documents, the contents of the unit and any context around it. That's not something I have information about. He left 15 minutes later. I sat at the kitchen table with the key card on the table in front of me, and the deed beside it and my 1 cup of coffee going cold. Sandra, I thought. What is this? Here is what I knew about Sandra's business trips, which is to say, almost nothing, and by agreement. Early in our marriage, 15 years in, approximately, when the projects had become substantial enough that she was traveling 4 or 5 times a year and occasionally more, Sandra had sat me down and said with the direct clarity that was one of her defining qualities, Kevin, my work has aspects that I can't fully discuss. I'm not going to ask you to be okay with that. I'm going to ask you to trust me, and in return I will tell you, we are financially safe, I am doing nothing illegal, and everything I do is because I'm building something for us. I had asked one question. Are you in any danger? I had believed her. I had trusted her the way you trust a person after 15 years of evidence, not blindly, but based on accumulated information, on the record of who she had shown herself to be, on the 37 times before that moment that she had been exactly who she said she was. I had not asked again. In 14 more years, and now, sitting at my kitchen table in Washington Park, with a key card to a penthouse I didn't know I owned, I was beginning to understand that the trust had been warranted, but the not asking had left me standing at the edge of a very large unknown. I told Frank that evening at his house on Capitol Hill, sat in his living room with a beer I wasn't drinking, and described Victor Paulson and the deed and the key card. Frank listened without interruption. He is good at that. And when I finished, he looked at the key card I'd placed on his coffee table. You haven't gone yet, he said. No. It's been 4 days since the funeral. I'm not ready. What are you thinking? I'm thinking she had a reason for everything she did. She always had reasons. I picked up the beer. Set it down. I'm thinking I need to understand what I'm walking into before I walk into it. You going to sell it? Probably. We don't need a penthouse. I'm a high school history teacher, Frank. You're also apparently a penthouse owner. He looked at me. Kevin, what did she tell you when you asked about the business trips? That we were financially safe, nothing illegal, and that she was building something for us. I looked at the coffee table. She was apparently not wrong on any count. Frank was quiet for a moment. You going to call Ruth Calloway? Ruth Calloway. My attorney, a real estate and estate attorney in the Loudoun district, who had handled the Washington Park house purchase and Sandra's and my basic estate documents. Sharp, direct, the kind of lawyer who tells you things you need to hear without softening them past usefulness. Tomorrow morning, I said. Good. Frank picked up his own beer. And Kevin, whatever is in that penthouse, she wanted you to have it. She planned it out, legal and documented, and she made sure it got to you. He paused. Whatever it is, she thought you could handle it. Didn't know what was waiting in PH2. Didn't know what I was going to find when I opened that door. Didn't know that the woman I'd been married to for 29 years had been, in ways I was only beginning to understand, considerably more complicated and considerably more deliberate than even I had realized. I drove home to the Washington Park house, made 1 cup of tea, sat in the kitchen, looked at the key card. Sandra. I thought again. What did you build? Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to be here when that door opens. Ruth Calloway's office was in Loudoun, on Winecoop Street, in a building that used to be a warehouse and now housed the kind of businesses that appreciate exposed brick and high ceilings, and the general aesthetic of repurposed industrial space. Her office was on the 3rd floor with a window overlooking the Union Station Plaza. She had the deed and the LLC documents in front of her when I arrived Tuesday morning. She'd reviewed them overnight. I'd scanned and emailed everything Monday evening, and she had responded at 11 p.m. that night with, reviewed, legally clean. Come in at 9. Ruth is 58, direct, and has the specific no-nonsense quality of a woman who reached her level of professional standing by not wasting time on presentations. The transfer is clean, she said. The LLC was properly structured. The transfer to you personally is valid. There are no liens, no disputes, no complications in the title chain. She looked at me over the documents. The LLC has been operating for 8 years. During that time, it has paid property taxes, maintenance fees, and building assessments on time every quarter. It holds no debt. The penthouse was purchased outright. How much? I asked. Ruth checked the document. Purchase price 8 years ago, $1.4 million. Current estimated value based on comparables in the Spire Tower. She turned a page approximately 2.1 to 2.3 million. I looked at the Loudoun skyline through her window. Ruth, what does the LLC list as its business purpose? Consulting and advisory services. She set the document down. Kevin, I have to ask. You didn't know about this property? No. Or the LLC? No. She was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you to consider having a conversation with the LLC's registered agent before you decide to sell. There may be context that affects how you approach the asset. Who's the registered agent? She turned a page. A woman named Carla Brine, listed as a business associate of Sandra's LLC. Carla Brine. I had never heard that name. In 29 years. I'm going to go see the penthouse first, I said. Of course. Ruth looked at me with the specific directness of a person who has something else to say. Kevin, whatever you find in there, call me before you make any decisions. Any decisions at all. You know something, I said. I know that Sandra James was a careful woman who structured this transfer with considerable deliberateness. Careful, deliberate people don't leave things in a penthouse they don't intend for you to find. She handed me back the key card. Go see what she left you. The drive from Loudoun to Spire Tower takes 6 minutes on a good Denver morning. I know because I drove it twice, once on autopilot thinking, and then circled back to park properly, because I'd apparently pulled into a loading zone the first time without noticing. That is what happens to your situational awareness when your brain is running a separate, much louder program in the background. The Spire Tower is on Glenarm Place, a glass and steel residential high-rise that went up during the downtown Denver construction boom of the mid-2010s. 42 stories. A doorman, a lobby that is not ostentatious, but is clearly not trying to be modest either. The kind of building where the residents park in a secured underground garage, and the elevators have mirrors and the hallways smell faintly of very good carpet. I had never been inside it before in my life. Tuesday, September 24th, 10:45 a.m. Tess Merrow, the building manager, met me in the lobby. She was 45, professional, with the efficient warmth of someone who deals with a range of resident situations and has learned to read rooms quickly. She had clearly been briefed, by Victor Paulson presumably, because she greeted me by name and offered her condolences without my having to explain why I was there. "Mr. James, I'm very sorry for your loss. We were all fond of Mrs. James here." I stopped. She was here often? Tessa's expression calibrated, not evasive, but careful in the way of someone who is deciding how much belongs to her to say. She was a regular presence. We respected her privacy, as we do all our residents. A pause. "The penthouse is on 42. I'll take you up, unless you'd prefer to go on your own." "I'll go on my own," I said. The elevator to 42 was its own 30 seconds of compression. The specific rising pressure of a man ascending towards something he doesn't fully understand yet, in a building he didn't know he owned, to see a space his wife purchased and used in silence for 8 years. The 42nd floor had 2 units, PH1 and PH2, a short carpeted hallway, a window at the end with a view of the Denver skyline that was, even in my current state, objectively extraordinary. The Front Range Mountains visible to the west, the city grid below, the particular high and clear quality of Denver altitude light. I stood at the door of PH2, the key card in my hand. "She wanted you to have this," Frank had said. "Whatever it is, she thought you could handle it." I put the key card to the reader. The light went green. I pushed the door open. The penthouse was, I registered this in fragments, the way you take in a space that is much larger than you expected. A 2-floor unit with floor-to-ceiling windows on the western wall, showing the mountain view. An open living area with furniture that was elegant without being showy. A kitchen that was better appointed than any kitchen I had ever used. And a staircase to the upper level in the back right corner. All of that I registered in approximately 2 seconds. Because in the 3rd second, I saw what was in the living room. Sitting on the couch, a large sectional in deep gray, facing the mountain view windows, was a woman I had never seen before, 60 or so, with silver hair cut short and neat, in a blazer and slacks with reading glasses on and a folder open on her lap. She had clearly heard the door open and had looked up, and she was looking at me now with an expression that was not surprise, but was something adjacent to it, more like the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing they were not entirely sure was going to happen, and it has now happened. She stood up, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone giving a situation its appropriate weight. "Mr. James," she said, "I'm Carla Brine." The next 4 seconds were a specific kind of stillness, the kind where your brain is processing several things simultaneously, and none of them are complete yet. The woman who had been working in Sandra's penthouse. The name Ruth had found in the LLC documents. The calm, weighted quality of her presence. Not hiding, not startled, simply there. "How did you get in?" I asked. Calm. My voice was calm. I teach teenagers who are trying to get away with things. I know how to keep my voice calm when my interior is doing something else entirely. "Sandra gave me a key," Carla said. "I've had one for 8 years. I've been coming here. I wanted to collect some documents before the unit was transferred, and I wasn't sure when you'd—" She paused. "I should have called first. I'm sorry, I genuinely am. Who are you?" She held the folder in front of her, both hands the posture of a person who has prepared for this conversation and is going to have it correctly. I was Sandra's business partner, her primary one for the last 11 years. Consulting work, actual consulting, corporate strategy, the kind that companies hire you for and pay significant fees for, and don't advertise publicly because the work is sensitive. She looked at me steadily. "Your wife was extraordinarily good at it. She had the best mind for organizational dynamics I've ever worked with." I looked at the woman, at the penthouse, At the mountain view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She used this place for work, I said. Not a question. For meetings, yes. Client confidentiality requires neutral ground. Not the client's offices, not her home. This was her professional space. Carla paused. Mr. James, I know you didn't know about this. Sandra told me you didn't know the specifics. Did she tell you why she didn't tell me? She said, Carla chose her words carefully. She said you were the most honest and uncomplicated person she'd ever known, and she meant that as the highest compliment. She said her work required a certain kind of contained knowledge, need to know, and that you didn't need to know because it didn't affect you and it would only create worry she didn't want to create. Sat down in a chair across from the couch, looked at Carla Brine. Tell me what she did, I said. The actual work. Carla sat back down on the couch, opened the folder. Corporate Intelligence and Transition Strategy. When companies are in distress, leadership transitions, hostile situations, board disputes, regulatory exposures, they sometimes need someone who can come in without a visible connection to any party and assess the landscape cleanly. Sandra was that person. She was brilliant at reading organizations, at identifying where the actual problems were versus where everyone thought the problems were. She paused. The clients were significant. Fortune 500 level, mostly. The fees matched. How significant? I asked. Because at this point, I was a history teacher in a penthouse, and I needed to understand the dimensions of what I was standing in. Carla looked at me. Then she turned to a page in the folder and slid it across the coffee table. A financial summary. Sandra's LLC revenue. 11 years. I looked at the numbers, then looked again because the first look produced results my brain wanted to verify. She cleared this, I said. Flat, looking at the page. Annually in good years, Carla said. The work was well compensated because the stakes for the clients were extremely high and the discretion was absolute. I set the page down, looked at the mountain view, Denver doing its mid-morning thing 42 floors below, the Rockies west of everything. The air clear the way it gets at altitude when the light is right. 29 years, I thought. She was doing this for 29. No. 11 years of the current work, more before. The consulting, the projects. She said we were financially safe. She was not wrong. She was describing an understatement so large it had its own zip code. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. For real. Now let's keep going, because we are nowhere near the end of this. Carla and I talked for 2 hours. She told me about the work in detail, the mechanics, the ethics of it, the way Sandra had navigated the confidentiality requirements with the precision of someone who had thought through every implication. The work was legal, completely, documentably on-the-record legal. Sandra had been meticulous about that, partly because she was that kind of person, and partly because she understood that work in sensitive corporate environments survives only as long as its practitioners are unimpeachable. She told me about the clients, not by name, the confidentiality still held, but by type, by situation, by the problems Sandra had solved. A pharmaceutical company board in crisis, a regional bank merger that was fracturing along loyalty lines, a technology firm whose founder was being managed out by a board that didn't understand what they were managing out. Sandra had gone in, assessed, advised, resolved, again and again. For 11 years. She loved it, Carla said, not wistfully, factually. She was genuinely energized by it. She used to say it was like the opposite of teaching. You taught the same thing to new people every year, and she solved new problems with the same toolkit every time. She talked about my work often. She was proud of you. Carla looked at me directly. She said you were the most grounded person she knew, that you made everything else possible because you were always exactly who you said you were. I sat with that for a moment. The compliment and its weight. The fact that Sandra had apparently described my steadiness as the foundation that made her mobility possible. She built something for us, she had said, 14 years ago. The Penthouse, I said. Why this specifically? Why keep a property? Several reasons. Carla closed the folder. Practicality. A neutral meeting space she controlled completely. Investment. The market value has gone up substantially. And I think, She paused. I think she liked having something that was entirely hers, a space that belonged to her professional self, separate from the home and the family and the teaching history teacher life. She looked at me. She loved that life, Mr. James. She loved you and her children. This wasn't running from something. This was having a full self. I nodded slowly. It was the most Sandra thing I'd ever heard said about her by someone who was essentially a stranger. What happens now? Carla asked. To the unit. I don't know yet. I stood up, walked to the western windows, stood in front of the mountain view that Sandra had looked at from this room for 8 years. I'm not making any decisions yet. Of course. I turned around. The folder. What's in it? Documents Sandra wanted you to have. A summary of the LLC's current financial position. Contact information for the accounts. A letter. She picked up the folder and held it out. She prepared this 14 months ago when she did the asset transfer. She said, when she gave it to me, she said, if something happens to me and Kevin comes to see the penthouse, give him this. He'll know what to do with it. I took the folder. She knew what to do with it. Sandra had apparently believed. He'll know. I didn't know it yet. Hadn't opened the folder, hadn't read the letter, hadn't processed the full scope of what the financial summary inside was going to show me. I didn't know yet about Gordon Hale, Sandra's silent partner, or what he was going to do when he heard the penthouse had transferred. I didn't know about the insurance investigation that Detective Ray Grover was quietly running. I didn't know about the decision Amber was going to force me to make before the month was out. I stood in Sandra's penthouse, with Sandra's folder in my hands and Sandra's mountain view in front of me, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that room. Not betrayal. Not anger. Awe. 29 years and she was still surprising me. There is a specific quality to reading words written by someone who is dead, not like reading their old texts or their emails. Those were written for the moment. A letter written 14 months before death, written with the knowledge that it may be the last direct communication between two people, written by someone who is thinking carefully about what you would need to hear. That is a different kind of reading. You feel the intent in every sentence. The weight of someone choosing these particular words for you, specifically, knowing you might receive them without them. I sat in Sandra's gray sectional couch in PH2 of the Spire Tower, with the Denver mountains in the window and Carla Brine gone. She'd left at 1 p.m. with a quiet handshake and her card and the assurance that she was available for any questions, and I opened the folder. The letter was on top. Sandra's handwriting, the neat, deliberate cursive she'd always used. The kind that people who learned to write in the 70s have and that nobody seems to learn anymore. Kevin, if you're reading this, then something happened and I wasn't there to explain it myself. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. The not telling, the locked compartments, the years of business trips that I know you accepted on faith because that's who you are and I never fully deserved it. Let me try to explain what I couldn't while I was alive. The work was real. Everything Carla will tell you is accurate. I am not going to insult your intelligence by pretending I kept it from you for your benefit alone. I kept it for mine, too. Because I needed something that was entirely mine, that I controlled entirely, that existed independent of the wife and mother geography that I loved, but that sometimes felt like the only map available. I needed a professional self that was separate, and I was afraid that explaining it would make it smaller, or that the questions would make it harder to maintain, or that you would worry in ways I couldn't manage. I told myself it was protection. I know some of it was cowardice. What I want you to know, none of it was about you. Not 1 minute of it was a rejection of you or our life. That life is the one I chose. You are the one I chose. 30 years later, still you. Still the man at the faculty mixer who asked what position I wanted him to take. I never found a better answer to that question than the one you gave that night. Now the practical things, because I know that's what you need from me right now. The LLC summary in this folder reflects its current state. The accounts are detailed on page 3. Ruth Calloway has the access information. I contacted her 6 months ago and left a sealed envelope. She knows what to do. The penthouse is yours to do with as you choose. Sell it, keep it, give it to Amber and Drew. Do whatever makes sense for your life now. I chose this building because it appreciates reliably and because the view is the best in Denver, and because I wanted to give you something that took care of you the way you always took care of everything else, without being asked. There is one thing I need to ask you to do. Page 4. Please read it carefully. I loved you every day, Kevin. Every complicated, compartmentalized, imperfect day of it. Sandra. I read it twice, sitting on the gray couch with the mountains in the window. Then I sat with it for a while, not crying. I had done the acute crying already, in the first 2 days, in the specific private way that men who teach teenagers have learned to do their grief where students can't observe it. This was something past crying. This was the processing of something very large and very specific and very real. She chose me, I thought, every day, even in the compartments. She chose. I turned to page 4. It was a short page, 3 paragraphs. The first identified a man named Gordon Hale, described as a silent partner in a separate LLC adjacent to Sandra's consulting work. A man who had contributed seed capital to several of Sandra's early projects in exchange for a minority interest in future earnings. The arrangement was documented. Legal. Gordon Hale had received his agreed returns over 11 years. The second paragraph said, Gordon is going to contact you. He may suggest that the returns he received were insufficient and that he has a claim on the penthouse or other assets. He does not. Conrad Marsh, and here she listed a Denver attorney I didn't recognize, has the documentation that confirms this. Do not engage with Gordon directly. Call Conrad. The third paragraph said, Gordon was not a good man to do business with, and I regret that I didn't see it sooner. He will try to make you feel like you don't understand the arrangement. You will understand it completely once you talk to Conrad. Trust yourself. You've always been smarter than you think you are. I set the page down. Smart enough, I thought. She left me a map. I called Ruth Calloway from the Penthouse at 2:15. Kevin. She left a letter, I said. She mentioned you. A sealed envelope. A pause. I have it. I've had it for 6 months. She instructed me not to open it until you called me from the Penthouse. Why the Penthouse specifically? She said if you called me from there, it meant you'd opened the letter and read the whole thing, including page 4. She wanted to make sure you had context before I gave you the envelope's contents. What's in the envelope? The full financial summary of the LLC portfolio and the contact information for Conrad Marsh. A pause. Kevin, I need to tell you, I reviewed what Sandra sent me. I know the scope of the portfolio. I want you to be sitting down when you look at the numbers on page 3 of that folder. I'm sitting down. Look at the bottom line. The total. I turned to page 3 of the folder. Found the bottom line. I looked at it. Looked again. Ruth. Yes. This is what I think it is? Combined LLC value, investment accounts she held separately, and a penthouse? Yes. That's what it is. Ruth's voice was steady, the steadiness of a professional who prepared for this conversation. Your wife was very successful at what she did, Kevin. Very. The number on page 3 was not a number that belongs in the life of a high school history teacher in Washington Park. It was a number that belongs in a different category of life entirely. The category that has financial advisors and estate managers and the kind of attorney that Conrad Marsh presumably was. She said we were financially safe. She had used, I was now certain, the most spectacular understatement of our 29-year marriage. What do I do? I asked. First, call Conrad Marsh. Today if possible. Second, don't do anything, say anything, or sign anything until you've spoken to him. Third, Ruth paused. Kevin, you're going to be okay. More than okay. Sandra made sure of that with the same thoroughness she apparently applied to everything else. Gordon Hale called my cell phone at 4:30 that afternoon. I was in the parking garage of the Spire Tower, still in my car having spent the last hour sitting in Sandra's penthouse, making a list of everything I needed to understand and everyone I needed to call. I let it go to voicemail. The message was smooth, practiced, warm in the manufactured way of a man who has done this before. Introduced himself, expressed condolences, mentioned that he and Sandra had had a long-standing business arrangement that he'd very much like to discuss at my earliest convenience, and left a callback number. I forwarded the voicemail to Ruth. Then I called Conrad Marsh. Conrad Marsh was 60, with the direct and thorough manner of a corporate attorney who has spent his career in exactly these situations. He'd been briefed by Sandra. Of course he had. Sandra had briefed everyone before she died, and he walked me through the Gordon Hale documentation in 45 minutes with the efficiency of a man laying out evidence in sequence. Gordon Hale's investment. The documented returns, 11 years of quarterly distributions, all signed and receipted by Gordon himself. The agreement's termination clause, which Sandra had executed properly 18 months ago when she restructured the LLC. Gordon's signature on the termination acknowledgement. He has no claim, Conrad said. Not on the Penthouse, not on the LLC, not on anything in your wife's estate. His interest was fully liquidated and he acknowledged it in writing. Then why is he calling me? Because he's betting you don't know that. Conrad paused. He's done this before, Mr. James tested estate beneficiaries in the period of grief when they're disoriented and unfamiliar with the documents. He assumes you didn't know about your wife's business. He assumes you're vulnerable. What do I do if he calls again? Give him my number. That's all. I called Gordon back the next day, Wednesday, September 25th, his smooth voice again. The condolences. The long-standing arrangement. The suggestion that there were matters that needed to be settled. Gordon, I said, I'm going to give you a phone number. His name is Conrad Marsh. He has all the documents from the arrangement, including the termination acknowledgement with your signature. A pause. The smooth voice did something complicated. I'm not sure what Sandra may have told you. She told me exactly what I needed to know, 14 months ago, in writing. I read him Conrad's number. Have a good day, Gordon. I hung up. Sandra, I thought. You mapped every exit. I called Amber and Drew that evening, Wednesday, both of them together on a video call from the Washington Park House kitchen. Amber on her Seattle couch, Drew at his Colorado Springs apartment table, both of them with the tired, slightly hollowed look of people 2 weeks into acute grief. I told them about the Penthouse, about Carla Brine, about the LLC, about the letter. I did not tell them the number on page 3 until I had told them everything else. The work, the clients, the careful structure, the reasoning Sandra had given in the letter. I wanted them to have the context before the figure, because the context was what made it make sense. When I told them the number, Drew was quiet for a long moment. Then, Dad, I know. She was doing all of that the whole time? 11 years of the current work, some form of it for longer. I looked at them on the screen. My 2 children, processing their mother in a new dimension. She was very good at it, by all accounts. Amber was quiet. She'd been quiet for most of the call, which with Amber usually means she's doing the most processing. Then, she wanted you to have the Penthouse specifically, not the LLC, not the accounts. The Penthouse. Yes. Dad. Amber looked at the screen directly. She wanted you to have something solid, something you could stand in. She knew you'd need to understand it physically before you'd believe it was real. I looked at my daughter, 29 years old, her mother's perceptiveness, with my patience layered over it. The combination was, as it had always been, devastating in its accuracy. Yeah, I said. I think that's right. Are you going to sell it? I thought about the mountain view, the 42nd floor, the gray couch where I'd sat and read Sandra's letter, the morning Denver light through the western windows. Not yet, I said. Not for a while. Detective Ray Grover called me in early October. He was running a routine insurance investigation, standard procedure for accident claims of Sandra's policy size, and had questions about her business activities. The call lasted 20 minutes. I referred him to Conrad Marsh for the business documentation and to Ruth Calloway for the estate. Both attorneys had been briefed. The investigation closed within 3 weeks. I returned to South High on October 14th, the Monday after fall break. My classroom, the parking lot view, 5th period history, the particular specific smell of a school building that hasn't changed in the 22 years I've been in it. My students, in the way of teenagers who have been told something difficult has happened to a teacher and have decided to be decent about it, were unusually quiet for the first week back. Not performatively quiet, genuinely thoughtful, in the way that young people sometimes are when they've been reminded that adults have full lives outside the classroom. I taught the unit on the American industrial expansion of the late 1800s, the Gilded Age, self-made wealth, corporate innovation, the ethics of accumulation. I have always taught this unit with a certain detachment, academic interest, historical analysis. That October I taught it differently, with the particular insight of a man who now understood, in a way he hadn't before, what it takes to build something significant outside the visibility of the people who love you. Not because you're hiding it from them, because some things are built in the spaces between. Frank Odom came for dinner the Friday of my first week back. We ate at the Washington Park House kitchen table. Sandra's kitchen, with Sandra's good pots and Sandra's choice of chairs, and Sandra's herb garden visible through the window that needs replacing in the spring, but that Sandra always said she liked because it rattled slightly in the wind, and she found the sound comfortable. Frank brought wine, we ate. The house was quiet in the particular way it was going to be quiet from now on. "How was the first week back?" Frank asked. "Okay, better than I expected." "The penthouse?" "I went back on Wednesday. Sat in it for an hour. Looked at the mountains. Still thinking about selling?" "I thought about that. About Sandra's letter. About I wanted to give you something that took care of you the way you always took care of everything else without being asked." "No," I said. "I'm going to keep it. For now." I picked up my wine. "Amber suggested we use it. Family, when people visit. A base in the city. Better than hotel rooms." I paused. Sandra would have liked that, I think. The penthouse being used. Frank nodded. She would. We were quiet for a moment. The Washington Park House around us. The 30 years of it. The specific accumulated life of a place where two people had built something together without either of them knowing the full dimensions of what the other was building. "Kev." Frank looked at me across the kitchen table. "Are you okay?" "Honestly." I thought about how to answer that. About the penthouse, and the letter and the number on page 3. About Gordon Hale hanging up on a Tuesday afternoon with Conrad Marsh's phone number and nothing else. About Carla Bryan in the gray couch with a folder, waiting patiently for the man Sandra had apparently described as the most grounded person she knew. About a woman who had built something extraordinary in the spaces between her life, and had documented it meticulously, and had handed it to me with a key card and a letter, and the specific confidence that I would know what to do with it. I was a 57-year-old high school history teacher in Washington Park. I drove a 10-year-old Subaru. I owned, pending sale or long-term decision, a $2.2 million penthouse on the 42nd floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with the best view of the Front Range in the city. I had been loved for 29 years by someone so thoroughly and specifically that she'd arranged for a notary to hand me keys to that love 9 days after she died. "Yeah," I said to Frank. "I think I am." He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Outside, the Washington Park neighborhood was doing its October thing. The leaves coming, the air cooling, Denver getting ready for winter the way it always does, without apology or preamble. Sandra had always loved October in Denver. She used to say it was the best month, because it was honest. Nothing pretending to be warmer than it was, nothing trying to be something it wasn't. I thought about that for a long time after Frank left. She had been, in the end, exactly who she said she was. The compartments didn't change that. The work didn't change that. 29 years of the most interesting person I ever met, choosing me, every single one of them. That's the whole story. The penthouse is still on the 42nd floor. The view is still extraordinary. And every time I go up there, which is more often than a practical person probably should, I stand at the western window and look at the mountains and think, well done, Sandra. You always were better at the details than I was. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.
Looking back at everything, I have to say this clearly. Sandra may have lived a life filled with secrets and complexities, but her heart was completely devoted to her family. From my perspective, the way she prepared everything, from legal protection to financial security, even anticipating threats from people like Gordon Hale, reflects a level of care and love that goes far beyond the ordinary. What stands out to me the most is the quiet trust in their marriage. Kevin respected her space for nearly 3 decades, and in return, he received something far more meaningful than wealth. He received proof that he was always her safe place. And the key lesson here is simple. True love often lives in the things we do silently for each other. Sandra didn't use wealth to show off. She used it to protect and provide for the people she loved. This story reminds us that behind the calm surface of a long marriage, there can be an entire ocean of love beneath it. Kevin may still be a history teacher, but now he holds one of the most beautiful chapters of his own life, What do you think about Sandra's choice to keep everything a secret? Does it take away from honesty in a relationship, or does it show a different kind of love?